I'm gonna switch back to software just for a quick reaction. Let's talk about core game loops because I really like to think about these. I don't think I write core game loops as well as I should or could, so this should hopefully be a bit educational for me as well. Also, let me move my camera back down. Camera. There we go.
Hi everybody, it's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today I want to talk about core game loops.
Yes.
This is something that's absolutely fundamental to game development. I'm incredible.
And I've seen games get made without having loops. There are games I know of. I know some of the people that worked on them that are on Steam right now, and a core gameplay loop was never made. Blows my mind.
Incredibly embarrassed that I've had this channel for more than a year and I've never talked about this.
True.
And I bring that up because it's so fundamental. I don't even think about it. I've mentioned this a few times about other things that it doesn't occur to me to talk about certain things because it's just so like endemic to the process. And I've been doing it for so long. It doesn't even occur to me that this is something I should mention. But I was looking at something online and they were talking about core game loops and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have not even mentioned core game loops. So let's talk about this. Because this is a core game loop. If you're a designer, you're going to be thinking in terms of this. You're going to be writing it up almost immediately when you make a game.
I mean, that's one of the first things we did for Golden Chronicles too, is like, after we just did some prototyping, right? And I knew the core gameplay loop in my head, but the reason you write it down is so that you have it in writing. You can reflect upon it and other people joining the project can see it. So this is one of the first things we made along with our pillars, right? So what is the most important thing to this game and what is the player going to be doing throughout the progress of this game? Thanks for all the help, by the way. No, it's no problem. I'm really glad. I like seeing other people's progress. It infuses me. For instance, here is our gameplay loop at the moment, which I think is a little bit simple, but interact with NPC, get commission, explore open world, collect ingredients, make potions, complete commission, obtain reward. Now, I have what I call like sub loops, which are like explore open world. What does that mean? You know, what are you doing apart from collecting ingredients? And you can put in there some other things of, well, you're also completing puzzles, you're discovering locations, you're fighting the corruption. So there are things like that, right? The open world is such a core part of the game that it has its own loop of what you're expected to do in there. So you go from your hut in between assignments from NPCs usually, although you might have to leave to go get some ingredients, doing some things, and then when an NPC comes back to your hut, then you return to the hut and you continue with their make potions, complete commission, obtain reward, right?
If you're a programmer, unless you're a specialist, like a network programmer or maybe just doing UI, you're going to spend much of your time on core game loop code.
Yes.
So let's talk about it. What is the core game loop? The core game loop is the set of actions in a game that most players will spend most of their time doing.
Yeah.
You can think of it as what are the most frequent and repeated
actions
yes, that players take in your game. I'm going to talk about how these are identified and why you need to identify it because, like I said, I should have done this as the first video I ever made.
He's right.
Some games,
he's right. It's just I love pausing Tim Cain, by the way, always fun. But he's right. It's just fundamental. It's like the first thing you sit down and do because you're explaining a game idea to somebody, right? And we talked about it with Lazarla, right? It's like, okay, you have your game. What's the loop here? How does the player go from phase to phase? And you had day and night cycles, right? Which is really common in some games like that. So it's like, okay, so how does the player go from day to night back to day again? and then what are the parts of that that the player is doing. Good idea to add variables. Usually with your loop, you're adding just actions, and then you go into the design document and you kind of emphasize where's the depth here, right? Okay, the player goes from here to here to here. Where's the depth? Can make the scope get out of hand control very quickly though, so it's a balance. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to. It's like you kind of like combine your loop and your pillars, right? So you say, okay, here's the loop of the actions. Now here are the pillars, which are our most central aspects of the game's design that we need to put the most work into. So for us, it's alchemy, open world, and NPCs, right? So we're pouring most of our effort into making the open world have a lot of variety and having a lot of depth to how it impacts the player's gameplay. We have the alchemy system, which is very freeform and sandboxy, and then we have the NPCs, which we're spending a lot of time on, adding all this depth to their stories and micro reactions to the things you say, not just the potions you provide. And this is where we have spent most of our time, and we will spend most of our development time. Other things will be not less important, but just they may not take front and center stage with it, right? I like to do it as pillars, and I don't think this is the best way to show them, but it is the way that I do that. Like, here is the pillar, and here are the blocks of the pillar that give it the foundation, right? That give it the strength. Like, everything is useful, freedom of creation and immersion. So we put the player in the 3D space in making potions. We allow the player to create whatever they want with very few restrictions. And then everything is useful. So potions and effects need to have some understandable use in open world and or with NPCs. So all of the effects that exist on those potions need to actually have some use, not just, oh, here's a potion of stop farting and I give it to one NPC and now that NPC's story is done. And now that effect and that ingredient essentially have diminished use, right? But something like restore health or create fire, it's like these things have continued use throughout the open world. Most important stuff at the top, and then as you go down the diagram, both the detail and quantity increase. You could do it like, I'm not saying you can't. There is no one perfect way to create game design pillars, right? As long as it is an efficient way to communicate what is most important to the game. That's it. That's your goal. And no matter how you do that, whether it's a song, whether it's a prototype or written design pillars, although I would recommend writing it no matter what, right? Whatever is the quickest and most efficient way to convey, here is the most important part of our game, and here is why they are important to us. This is a bit old, though. I think we turned NPCs to storytelling. Storytelling is our third pillar. We reconfigured that pillar. Alchemy, open world, and storytelling. But yeah, it's like these two things, I don't mind prototyping first, but then once I feel like I have something here, I will write pillars and gameplay loop. And they are right at the top of our GDD because they are the most important. They're in the first section, right, of like the bare info. We have summary, story. We have like art style, players, target audience, genre, gameplay outline. Because you want to get the bare bones of the gameplay outline and who this is meant for first. And then you're like, okay, here's the loop. Here are our pillars. And we can expand upon them a little bit more here and what they mean to us. Then we have selling points, moods and emotions, inspiration, competing products, technical stuff, and then we can jump into the actual part of like the game, like the core system and features, the high level, right? And you can see we're kind of creating this story structure right now. NPC meets player, player learns about story and commission, player gets commission, fulfills commission, potion is tested, and different outcomes. That's it. I spy Genshin. Genshin does a lot of things very well. Number one, I think it does its open world really well, and the discovery. So, there's little hidden things around Genshin that if the player's looking for it, there's patterns like a group of flowers that are planted around each other. Usually they will have a hidden chest and some creatures to kill. So Genshin is really good at discovery. It puts things in your view and says, hey, if you go here and you check this out, you will be rewarded. And that's what discovery is, right? Exploration is a tool to have discovery. If you just have a big open world with nothing that to obtain, you just have exploration, you don't have discovery. There's nothing meaningful here. So Genshin is a really good game for discovery, along with like Elden Ring. Play more if I had a better computer. You can play Genshin on mobile, on phones. But yeah, it's a good game. Good game. Okay, back to the loops.
Easy to determine the core game loop. Most side scrollers, especially the really simple side scrollers, their core game loop is very easy to describe. You run to the right, jumping and shooting to progress through the level, to grab treasure, and to kill enemies. By the way, when you finish the level, your bonus is based on how long it took you to do it. There's the core game.
And it's really easy to overthink a gameplay loop, right? It's really easy to overthink a gameplay loop. Just keep it to actions. The reason it exists is so that you don't get sidetracked with what the player is going to be doing to reach that end goal and to repeat the loop, usually. I can show another one too that we made for this this game that was like Pain. We made a gameplay loop. Where is it? Start a new level, catapult character, destroy world, get points, complete objectives, unlock rewards, and you either catapult character again and you restart this, or you start a new level. That's it. Those are your actions. These are your rewards. Repeat. That way the developers coming in can say, okay, game idea is this. Oh, player is doing this. These are the most important aspects of the game. I get it. One starts role-playing as a radiator, even if the settings are the lowest possible. Jesus.
Now, RPGs can be a lot more complex than that, obviously, because there's a lot more actions that players can take, and defining what the typical player is can be really hard. So let's pop up for a second and just talk about,
especially with sandbox
let's say we're
elements.
talking about fantasy games. Fantasy games can have massively different core game loops. And now notice I didn't say RPGs. I just mean like two fantasy games. The core game loops can be wildly different. Some fantasy games, their core game loop may be entirely focused on combat. The whole point of it. Maybe it's a fantasy.
It's like Elden Ring.
Tactical combat.
You know, Elden Ring is very based on the combat, of course. So of course, the gameplay loop of that is going to be very different from, say, the Skyrim or something, right?
That game. Everything about their core game loop is combat. It is selecting the units you want to have in that combat. It is doing the combat, selecting the individual actions that each unit takes in combat. Everything about this is combat. But you might have another fantasy RPG, or fantasy game, I should say, where it's all about exploration. A lot of games have come out that are like this, where you're really just exploring a world. You're not really fighting. You're not really even talking to anything.
Yeah,
you're just running around the world.
Discovering.
Maybe it's just to have fun and explore. Maybe there's a story being told visually, but it's the exploration that's important. And then again, you may make a fantasy game, where most of the action is really conversation. There's a story, but it unfolds as you talk to NPCs, as you read books, as you look at computer terminals. these are narrative games that are telling their story primarily through a narrative. They maybe some of them have exploration components. Maybe they're linear and there isn't no exploration
Yep.
component. The reason I wanted to bring that up is you can see that just saying fantasy game doesn't tell you what.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason. Is when I say I'm making an open world alchemy game set in a fantasy world. Like, what the fuck does that even mean, right? It means nothing because it can mean a million different things, and that's where you have to start to define it, right? Where you have to say player does this, this, and this, and this, right? And that's that's what the summary of your game is usually going to include, right? Let me pull up the summary for Golden Chronicles again. I really hate. I'm gonna remove this step into the shoes. Look, you're an alchemist occupying a cozy hut along a bustling road, catering to adventurers and travelers with your potions. Gather ingredients, explore diverse biomes that change with the season and weather, and try to uncover the secrets hidden in every nook and cranny. So, we start to unravel some of the gameplay actions here. Like, what are you going to be doing? Okay, gathering ingredients, exploring a world, and uncovering secrets. Okay. Then, we utilize an open-ended alchemy system to concoct potions, poisons, and medicines by altering ingredient states to suit your client's preferences. Now we explain one of the core pillars. So the first one was we explain the open world. Second one is we explain the alchemy. Third one, storytelling. Dive into the lives and stories of colorful personalities seeking your aid, where meeting their needs can spell success, and failing to do so may lead to dire outcomes. But something more sinister lurks beneath the land, tainting the plants and animals as time passes. Will you find a cure for it, or succumb to the corruption as well? So note what we do here. This is the hook, right? Alchemist, cozy hut, bustling road, make potions for adventurers. Boom. Does that sound interesting to you? Yes? Perfect. Keep reading? No? Move on. Next, we talk about pillar number 1, or one of the pillars, let's say. Open world. Gather ingredients, explore, uncover secrets, and hidden stuff. Utilize an open-ended alchemy system. Boom. There we go. We explain how the alchemy system works very easily. Make all types of stuff, change states, freedom. Next one. Dive into these NPCs' stories, where the things that you say to them or help them, or how you help them, can change their fates, right? There, all 3 pillars have been talked, and now we have this ending hook. Something more sinister lurks beneath the land, tainting the plants and animals as time passes. Will you find a cure for it or succumb to the corruption? So that's like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm helping adventurers, but what else? Is there something to the environment that is going to be another antagonist, right? Because you could almost say the NPCs aren't the antagonist here. They're not the friction that comes with the game. And that's the corruption. So I'm not saying this is perfect, but this summary is far from bad. Hook, pillars, which, also talk about the loop a bit, and then that final ending hook. I like it. Make another Zelda game? Sounds like a Zelda. Who's making a Zelda game? Metroidvanias are really good examples of super hard games to reduce exploits. Hollow Knight is an amazing example. It's true. Yeah. But I mean, you can see just how fundamental the loop is. And if you look at any game on Steam, you're going to see the exact same thing. Deep Rock Galactic certainly doesn't need the... doesn't need to market itself too well because it's just an amazing game, but 1 to 4 player co-op FPS featuring badass space dwarves. There's your hook. That is your tagline. And then I guess you could say the whole thing is the tagline, really, because that's what you want to put here. 100% destructible environments, procedurally generated caves, endless hordes of alien monsters. That's it. There's your game. This human? There sounds like just... I'm making Zelda? Okay, there are similarities to Zelda. Yeah, he means Mila Zarla. There are similarities to Zelda. And Zelda's open world has a lot of similarities with what we want to do with our open world. Although our game will be a little bit less focused on combat and more on narrative.
The core game loop. They can be wildly different in all these games. Now, on my games, it's even harder because
you were as well. Okay, I'm not listening to you guys. That could be, that's very obvious. I'm clearly not paying attention to what you guys are saying enough for me to understand. There's just similarities. Like it's an inspiration, right? So I think Zelda does a lot of great things with its open world, and of course, yeah, I think that's an inspiration. Elden Ring, Genshin, all great open worlds.
The core game loop depends on the player's build. I may make a game
that's very true too.
I expect all the players may have to do combat occasionally. Some players will do it a lot.
Well, think of it this way too, especially games where you can talk your way out of problems, right? You have a split in that gameplay loop, so two players will experience a very different game. You might also have a game like games with like class-based systems, right? So you are playing one class and your friend is playing another class. Well, now the way that you play the game is very different from one another, and your actions are different. One person is focused on healing and supporting you from afar, and you're right there, dealing with boss mechanics, dodging 3 attacks in a row and then doing a roll. So I don't think anybody can say they've made an original game. I'm just going to say that. Every single thing is inspired by something else, whether we see it obviously or not. And most things are inspired by many different things. So, it's a lot of what I'm doing with Golden Chronicles is not even inspired by games at all. It's also inspired by the TV shows I've watched and things that I've written or things that I've seen in real life. Especially with like NPCs. Like, well, I just see the way people talk and interact with each other in real life, and that's what I want to recreate, is just some of that natural conversation and being able to offend others, offend the NPCs or have them offend you, and how do you deal with that, right? 90% games have inspiration from others, some take like 5 games and crunch into a game like Power World and First Ascended. I would say most games take inspiration. Every single game takes inspiration from other games. Every single one. Or at least something else that that artist has seen, right? And yeah, it's like for us, we're taking like the best of many games. Like Skyrim's alchemy, Elder Scrolls alchemy system, but even greater than that. We're going, inspiration from Elden Ring, Genshin, and you could say Zelda for the open world. Potion combat. I mean, our combat's going to be derived from other casual to mid-core type games, especially where effects are taking place more than just raw damage. So, it's all just an evolution upon each other, and then somebody might see our game and get inspired to make their game in some way. That's the hope, at least.
Players have to do dialogue occasionally. Some players may do it a lot.
Yeah.
All the players have to do stealth occasionally. Some players will do it a lot. And because these characters can be mutually exclusive, there is no one action in the core game loop that I can say all the players do. But when you group all them together, you can say most players will do most of these most of the time.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to learn what a core game loop is, I can tell you, you don't have to play an entire game from start to finish to know what its core game loop is.
For most games, okay, I'm a bit different because I'm a game designer, right? So for most games, I can even see a trailer, and I'm like, okay, I get what it is. And arguably, a good trailer should show you what the gameplay loop is, right? A gameplay trailer. And at most, it takes me maybe 30 minutes of playing a game. So there are games that I just want to see how they kind of function and what their systems are, that I'm not really interested in finishing the game, but I'll just load it up, play the first couple hours, be like, okay, I get the game. I understand. And especially for games that I'm I want to see if I'll like it. So like maybe like a new roguelike game. It's like, okay, I played a couple runs of it. I get it. I see what it's trying to do. And then I'm done. But he's right. You don't need long, and arguably, like I said, a good gameplay trailer should show you the whole gameplay loop in that trailer. So that when you come out of it, you're like, I know what this is. I know what I'll be doing in it. Will I buy it based on that? Yes or no? Otherwise, I'm going to feel like I was spoken to wrong. Like I was like the marketing was wrong, and I misinterpreted what the game was going to be, or they didn't sell me on the game that I bought. Cyberpunk 2077 was like that for me. They told me that was going to be an RPG first, a lot of dialogue, a lot of choices to make that would change the way that the game turned out. That's not what the game is. I felt like I was kind of lied to with that game. So, you know, you need to be accurate so that players don't feel like they were mishandled.
Usually you can pick up a game, play it for an hour, and you can probably pretty accurately define its core game loop.
Yes.
If it's a good game. And this is why some games fail, I think, is because they don't have a well-defined core game loop, and you can play for an hour and you're like, I still don't know what's going on.
True.
Alternatively, you could just play a demo. The whole point of a demo is to express the core game loop.
Yep.
And by the way, if you're making a vertical slice, you should also be thinking core game loop, because that's what you're trying to express.
Tim,
not just here's a visual example of the game, but I've got enough of the core game loop in there that you understand what the game's going to be like when you play it. It's not enough vertical slices. It's not enough for them just to be pretty. They have to instantiate the core game loop.
Yep.
A lot of times I've noticed that if you just watch a streamer play the game, that's enough for you to figure out the core game loop.
Yep, I do that as well. I have a lot of games that I might want to play, or that I know I would play if I had the time and the money. I'll just watch a streamer play it, and like you said, you can pick up the core gameplay loop really quickly. It's a really good exercise if you want to become a game designer, to reverse engineer gameplay loops. Take your favorite games and reverse engineer the gameplay loop and show it to game designers and say, what do you think of this? You know, and so that when you are thinking of your game and how you're going to write your gameplay loop, you have a good idea of what other ones look like. But he's right. Everything he's saying is right. Vertical slice, I mean, we've talked about it a million times before. Witcher 3, White Orchard, was the vertical slice. I would be very strongly believing of that for Witcher 3, right? This location. This is your vertical slice. This is your demo. This illustrates everything that your gameplay loop has to show and your pillars in a small section of the game with its own self-contained story that even leads you into the next one. So it has its hook and it has its exiting pull that will pull you into the next part of the world. And it's really well designed. This is a really well designed area. There are choices to make, people to affect, bounties, treasures, weapons, blueprints, things to craft, bosses to kill, potions to find, taverns to play games in and meet NPCs. Everything is here in a small vertical slice. It's beautiful. Uncle Charles, you want to take good pics of your games, they know what it is, yes. And by good pics, not bullshit pic. That's why I don't have a Steam page for Golden Chronicles, because I have to put pictures and trailers up there. It's required by Steam. But I have a prototype. Everything is going to be replaced. You know, it's way too early for me to think of that, and a lot of indie devs make a mistake of marketing too early. Don't market too early. You often only get one chance to do it right, and you want to do it when you have something real to show. If you cannot take a 10-minute unedited video recording of your game that shows off the whole loop and is satisfactory, you are probably not ready to market. Because I promise you, a 10-minute video of your game unedited is going to do a lot for its marketing. We can take a look at God of War E3 2016 gameplay. I think it was 2016. 10-minute trailer of God of War 2016. With, for the most part, unedited gameplay. That showed off the combat, showed off its focus with its pillars. Everything's here. It's perfect. And you can tell that because it has 419 upvotes, 1,000 upvotes, and only 12,000 downvotes, and 22 million views. Success. Done. Like you said, you know, gameplay, game loops, gameplay pillars, vertical slices, these are all just so fundamental. Do your pre-production properly, your game and your players will thank you later for it. They really will. And anybody you bring onto the game to work on it later, you don't have to sit down with them and waste a whole bunch of time trying to tell them, well, here's this and this and this and this small thing. Say, here's my gameplay loop, here's my pillars, here's my summary, here's my prototype. That's enough. That should be enough for you to understand what we're trying to make. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Just watch them for an hour and you'll see what they're doing over and over and over again. Are they jumping? Are they sneaking around? Are they hacking terminals? What seems to be the thing that they do the most? That's the core game loop. Let me make a big distinguish here between core game loops and design pillars. I have a whole video on design pillars and I'll link it below. They are not the same thing.
They are not.
The design pillars are there to explain how every feature that you've selected to be in the game serves those pillars.
Yes.
But a core game loop is you saying, okay, of all those features that we've put in the game that serve the design pillars, these are the ones that I expect most of the players to experience most of the time. And there's difference there because you may have things that you put in, like let's say you put in reactivity. That's something I love putting in my games. Reactivity might be a design pillar, which means when you put in features, you're going to always ask the question of how does the player, what the player does when they interact with this feature, come back to them? How are they being told, hey, here's how good you're doing with this thing? The core game loop would be those features that the player does a lot. You would expect all of them to have large amounts of reactivity. Because if this is what the player is doing most of the time, it better be supporting that design pillar of reactivity. Because I've talked about you can occasionally have a feature that doesn't support all the design pillars. Like you may put something in that if humor is one of your design pillars, you may have something in the game that's not that funny as long as overall the game is funny.
Yeah.
But for your core game loop, it should probably touch on all your pillars because these features are what the player's doing a lot. It should have a basis in those design pillars.
Yeah, he's very right with that. I think 10 minutes is too long. I prefer 3 trails. Yeah, I'm not saying that 10 minutes is the preference, but that if you aren't ready to take a 10-minute unedited, cut section of your game and show it off to the public, you probably aren't ready to market your game yet. Because there's probably too much bullshit going on in that 10-minute unedited video that would turn customers off, right? So I'm not saying that the 10-minute trailer is preferable, but that you probably aren't ready to do a huge marketing push until you can do that. And players will still want to, especially nowadays, players will want to see the extended gameplay because extended uncut gameplay because it's too easy to make bullshit trailers that trick players. Way too easy.
So at this point, you should probably know why you want to define this, but let's dive into that. Your core game loop tells your entire team what to focus on. Because here are the features of this big design document. Here are the features that are the most important to get correct.
Yep.
To get in early, to get them correct. It will help you. It'll help the production staff decide what to prioritize. Because when there are features,
he's spitting facts right now, and I'll go back to the loop just to show. That's exactly what we've been doing. It's like, okay, I'd love to have fishing, I'd love to have it, but it is not important to show it off yet. And if anybody has downloaded the the open world and gameplay loop that I've made on the Discord, this is what you will achieve. It's very bare bones right now, of course, but you have an NPC, you can get commission, you can explore an open world, collect ingredients, make potions, complete commissions, and obtain rewards. They're not exceptional, but they're there. And that's where we then iterate upon it, we build upon it, and in the meantime, we can start to add some of these tertiary systems like farming, like fishing, that the player will be able to engage with that add depth to the game, but are not required to go through the core gameplay loop.
Does it have to be done? You're like, well, these are part of the core game loop. They have to be done. You could have a fun, it's like side quests. If you have to drop a side quest because you run out of time, that's okay because it's not part of the main story. Your features help you schedule in the same way. This is a great feature. It's fun, but is it part of the core game loop? And if it's not, it can go. You may not want it to go, but it can go. Similarly, when you get to the end of the game, this tells you where to spend a lot of your time optimizing. Because if core game loop features, like I said, it's where most players spend most of their time. You want that to be optimized. You want a smooth UI experience. You want a good frame rate.
I mean, and even more than optimize, it's like if fishing is not core to Golden Chronicles, which it isn't, it not only can it be cut, but if we get so far that we need to focus on core stuff first, we can say, you know what, just let fishing be what it is now. We can always try to make some improvements after launch. What's more important is getting this core gameplay experience done perfectly, or as perfectly as we can achieve. So yeah, he's spitting facts. I'm going to let him speak.
To make sure that there are no bugs in that core game loop, because that's what most of your players are going to spend most of their time doing. If there's an occasional bug that occurs from some obscure thing that the player can maybe do, like maybe if they craft one item at a particular table and give it to a particular NPC and it causes that NPC to go in a bad state, you want to fix that.
Yep.
But if you had to prioritize that bug against, oh yeah, if you ever shoot a gun at an NPC that has more than 5 hit points, sometimes the game crashes. Fix that. So, another reason you want to make your core game loops, you want to define it as early as you can in your design docs, is publishers will want to see them. They frequently ask to see them, and it's what the publisher will judge all of your game content.
Yep. I will show you our pitch deck, which I think is the most up-to-date. And right there. Right there. And the next one is our pillars. Here's our overview, quick technical info, core gameplay, pillars. And then we go from selling points, we have some continued gameplay, talk about the inspiration, competition, and some sales and marketing goals. And then our timeline for production. And even this, I think, was sometimes a little bit too wordy, but it was liked. Publishers seem to enjoy it. They like the idea, and yeah, we'll just keep working on it. Like we'll need to update our GDD relatively soon. We'll need to, of course, make a new pitch deck whenever we're ready to do pitching again, which will be sometime next year. And we just keep going at it, But he's right. Publishers will want to see it. Players might even want to see it, or they'll at least want to convey it. Marketing teams will want to see it so that they can say, okay, here are the most important things to show off when we make a trailer, if someone else is making your trailers, which is pretty common. That's just what you need. You need to have the gameplay loop. There's no excuse not to have it, and you are not a good designer if you can't make even a halfway decent gameplay. Or just make one. Just try it. It's really easy. You overthink it all the time, but just write down point to point to point, what is the player going to be doing in this game? And you can take a look at most games and you can figure it out. It's not too challenging. Deep Rock Galactic. You have your hub, okay? A lot of little mini games in hub. Team up in hub. Go into dive. Fight enemies. Complete objectives. Return to surface. Buy, obtain rewards, buy stuff. Those are your actions, and then you can clean that up and define it a bit better so that it's easier to showcase. That's it.
against. If they see you saying your core game loop is this, and then your game seems to be filled with a bunch of features and content that aren't part of the core game loop, they're going to ask you why it's there.
Yep.
But, and I'll tell you this, there's another reason for you to make sure the core game loop is defined early, because you want publishers or whoever's giving you money to see that core game loop. It is a great way to provide context for answers to your questions when they have questions about it. So if, for example, you have a publisher going, well, we really like microtransactions. A great way to respond to that, if you don't want them, is like, we don't see a role for microtransactions in this game's core.
Monetization. Premium game, DLC TBD, no loot boxes, microtransactions, NFT, blockchain, premium currencies, or pay for convenience. Right there. And I make sure to stress that. And if a publisher doesn't like that, have fun. A lot of games have horde marketing, even AAA games, they tend not to show gameplay. Yeah, you're 100% right. And I don't think you should trust any game without gameplay. And the reason gameplay trailers are sometimes, it's hit or miss, right? A lot of stuff gets mocked up, and it's easy to mock something up early before you even have tested the gameplay. I've seen it happen. Unfortunately, I've been in cases where I've had it, in my own studios that I've worked with, and I hate it. I hate it because it's cheating players. There's nothing wrong with mocking it up in order to test visually if like an idea is good, right? Does this mocked up gunplay look like it would be fun to play? If yes, okay, then let's try to recreate this mocked up gunplay. I mean, that's what like a movie is, right? Like a movie is, take like Batman fighting, right? They wanted to recreate some of the ways Batman fought in the movies and the choreography to create the Arkham games. And they succeeded. And it's fun to play with. It's visually very appealing. So you can mock that up visually and then use that as a base to recreate. But until you have that recreated, I don't think players should ever trust that what you've mocked up is going to be, reminiscent of the final. Is that the right word? It's not going to be. It may not be like what the final product is, right? Okay, back to Tim Cain. Sorry. Ranting here.
Or game loop. And the reason that's a nice way of phrasing it is either they have to figure out how microtransactions would fit in that core game loop, which they're probably not going to be able to do, or they're going to have to ask you to change the core game loop, which your response would be, that's the core game loop. So you want me to change the entire game. So we're going to throw away this, we're going to throw away these things, because if microtransactions are part of the core game loop, we're going to redesign.
And that itself is also so damn important. You should think of it that way. If you have to redesign the core gameplay loop, you are redesigning the entire game. And I think of gameplay in terms of percentages, right? Like, roughly what percentage of the time is the player spending doing part A of the gameplay loop, talking with NPCs to get commissions? How much of the time is the player spending with that? How much do I want the player spending time on that? And if you redesign the loop, if you add another section in or you take one out, you are now giving away or taking away percentage of that gameplay and putting it elsewhere. I will show you our production diagram. And this is pretty crucial too. So you have your, what was I thinking? Your pre-production, right? What do you need to start at the idea phase to prototype to get to your first playable? And keep in mind, this is where we are. We are in this section of Colton Chronicles development right now. General idea, one sheet, gameplay loop pillars. And what does it look like? Chaotic, rapid development of an iteration of prototypes, continuous honest feedback. If fun doesn't exist in this phase, it won't come after pre-production. And you need to embrace creativity. Just jump on the ideas that are fun. And when you're done with this, you should have your GDD created from successful first playable, and it's a living document, so you will continue to update your GDD, but you should at least have all of the core elements in there to get started on your vertical slice. You reiterate on your gameplay loop and pillars where necessary, because now is the time you lock them in and you say, time to make our vertical. And then you start planning for production, right, for your vertical. Once you're, really, at the end of your vertical slice, you can make, I guess, small adjustments to your pillars. I know I put gameplay loop here, but really, it's really scary because at the end of your vertical slice, it should be done. That should be done. Your game is done in terms of what the idea is supposed to be. You are not changing anything in your gameplay loop at this point. That's really stupid. You have your game. If you don't like what's in it, make a sequel, right? Or make a new game. But you lose out way too much time if you have to do any redesign here. It's just going to end up with terrible, terrible production timelines. Horrible. Again, been there, seen it happen, heard way too many horror stories. People who fucked up their pre-production. Something wasn't done here. Maybe there wasn't enough honest feedback. Maybe they didn't prototype long enough. Maybe they didn't have enough of the documentation ready to go into vertical slice. Maybe they decided to change things too late, and this adds budget to your production. Spend time doing your pre-production properly, and your production will benefit from that.
It is a nice defense against some of the things that publishers will ask you to add. But because if it's not part of the core game loop, you're like, I don't see a lot of players doing this, and I certainly don't see a lot of players doing this a lot. You can often get suggested features, either deprioritized or not considered altogether.
I've had that happen. I've done that. Unfortunately, I've worked in an instance where I felt like the person who was answering to the publisher was a bit of a yes man, and they would say something. They would suggest something, and this person would take it as an order. You know, like if we don't do this, they're not going to give us the money for the next milestone. This fucked me over so much that eventually I got into having the meetings with the publisher, and it was way, way better because I learned they weren't orders. They were just, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had this? And I could explain, well, I don't see the players doing this because of this, and this reason, and it's also not core to the gameplay loop, right? So I'd rather cut this feature at this moment and focus on what we need to do here. Okay. Way better. So yes, he's right. Having that as defense, having your pillars as a defense, having information about your market, about your golden standard customer, is all defense of, I don't think this feature fits, or I think the way that we're trying to move this feature goes against the premise of the game and what we're trying to achieve with the core pillars. Defense is really important, and it's not that everything publishers say is being bad, it's just that they are not the ones making the game. They do not have experience developing games, or in my case, designing games usually. So I am the expertise here. They are the expertise in what they're focusing on. It's a mutual arrangement, and you need to be able to be defensive, but by being defensive, you can still come at it from a point of experience and expertise, right? It's not that defensive, I think it's a bad rap, but it's really that you need to defend what you believe in should be in your game and shouldn't be.
One last thing about core game loop, and I'm saying this from experience. The bigger your core game loop, the longer it takes you to write it down, the more features that are part of it, the harder that game loop will be to implement.
Yep.
I say this from experience because when I make games that I say I want people to be able to play them all these different ways. I want them to talk through it and fight through it and stealth through it and go through primarily with companion support. That just added a lot of work and time to your schedule Because if that's the core game loop that you expect most of the players to be doing, it's got to be good. And of course, like I've always said, that then translates to a big core game loop will translate into a big schedule, which will translate into a big team.
It's exactly it. It's exactly it. Holy shit, it's I mean, and he words it so well because Tim Kaine is a fucking master. But he words it. It's exactly the reason I keep talking about this bullshit Wayward Realms game from the developers of Daggerfall. Where is it? Wayward Realms Kickstarter. Because it's exactly the way that I think when I read these Kickstarter pages, and especially very ambitious projects. I'm making an ambitious project. I've already budgeted that if I hire people in Poland, which unfortunately is not the most pricey place to get developers, it's quite cheap, I will still need like $3 million US. And that's still, I think, a little bit conservative. I think it was probably going to be closer to 4 by the time we're done with development. And when I see when I see shit like this, when you see, okay, 4, I'm sorry, but scope should not be a design pillar. That scares the shit out of me. But you have choices, consequences, role playing. Okay, so you're trying to go for this ambitious, large sandbox. Scope is already enough. Read some of this with me, okay? The Wayward Realms offers a massive procedurally generated world with plenty of variety in the environments and locales. Dungeons and cities are crafted to feel unique from one another. Use that right after the sentence that includes procedurally generated, offering limitless options for layouts and aesthetics. The world itself is ever-changing. Cities can grow, deteriorate, or be entirely destroyed by war, and the sky, landscape, and flora change with the seasons. Likewise, the world building runs deep with thousands of years worth of history through item descriptions, dialogue, lore books, and ancient runestones that dot the land. Players will be able to learn about the world, its history, and various factions, and the people who've chosen to make the archipelago their home. Archipelago, sorry. And it just keeps going. Truly meaningful choices for lasting effects on the world, your race, equipment, skills, narrative, and gameplay tactics, involvement in world events, everything is a choice. Every single sentence I read is just like Tim Kaine says, it's adding scope and it's adding complexity to that loop. And it's changing the way the player plays the game, and because of that, you need to cater to those playstyles. If playing playstyle A is supposed to be just as reasonable as B, C, or D, and yet you've put all of your money into making playstyle A good, well now B, C, and D, which if we use this as good as the playstyle A analogy, is going to be 75% of your players, now 75% of your players have a shit playstyle. So you keep adding in all these different ways to play, not realizing that you've just fucked over a good portion of people because you just couldn't meet the scope. It keeps going. There's no such thing as a failed quest in Wayward Realms, only results in future consequences, depending on how your choices affected the outcome. Positive or negative will be up to the world to decide and from the player to experience. Even I don't make bullshit up like this. I say that it is up to our writers. If you want to say no to all of the NPCs, you can. That doesn't mean you're going to have a good game, because the intention is for you to interact, right? And if you're purposefully missing out on one of our core pillars, yeah, you're not going to have the greatest experience. Okay, that's the player's choice. But at this point, if the player chooses something that you say will be just as good as, like I said, option A, B, C, or D, you have to meet it with that quality. And I don't see this meeting it with quality. All I hear is procedurally generated this, procedurally generated that. 500,000 square kilometers, which is twice the size of the United fucking Kingdom, with thousands of realistically scaled cities. There's no way this is as bad as Star Citizen in terms of what it's promising. And Star Citizen has barely even scratched the surface on everything it promises, and the game isn't even properly out yet. And it's wasted how much Star Citizen budget? How much have they spent? They raised 104 million in 2023, total of 644 million in crowdfunding. Biggest scam in gaming industry? Honestly, that's a good topic. It's almost $1 billion game. And you expect me to think that with a pledge of $710,000, that I think they mentioned that their goal is to make a vertical slice. Or is it just a first playable? I don't even see them mention it here. Working volunteer team, blah blah. Several more years, more like decades. Our aim with your pledge is to fund full-time development for 1 year in order to produce an early access build. I'm sorry, but you can't just put this game into early access and go to a publisher and say, yes, we want to make this. I don't think players want to play this. I don't think players want to explore a 500,000 square kilometer game where everything is procedurally generated and none of it has any unique personality. You can't use the word unique here when unique just means that everything is different. That doesn't mean that everything that's different is good. Option 1 is probably not as good as option 2, 3, or to infinity. That's not any way to build a game. You know, randomness works in certain games because there are usually enough combinations of that randomness to provide a good result. Roguelikes thrive on randomness. Random rooms, random loot that you find, random combinations of, but even those often present choices to help diminish bad case scenarios with randomness, right? Where you go to a shop and you see 5 different items for sale. You can afford one of any of those 5. Well, 4 of those might be trash for your build, and one of them might be good. And so instead of just giving you one random item to buy in the shop, they give you 5 because it helps to reduce negative effects of randomness. Not perfectly, but it helps. And it gives the player a choice and a way to strategize and understand, okay, this combination of this relic and this relic make me really powerful. Star Citizen is over-evolving. The scope they have is unachievable. Once they get to a point, they have to change other type of games that come out. Yeah, I think that at some point it will take so long for them to build what they want, but that by the time it comes out, it's either not going to be relevant anymore, people will have moved on and forgotten, or their old systems that at the time they made them were good now have to be updated to fit the expectations of the genre or that system that has been pushed forward by other games within the last, like, let's say, decade, right? It's why you don't want to spend forever making a game, because by the time you get that game out, it's potentially not relevant or technologically that advanced or interesting. You know, and if you come to me and say, I have this is, I can't even believe that the same people who made Daggerfall, well, maybe I can to some extent, but I can't believe that they would come to Kickstarter with this idea and think that this is a good idea. I don't think any publisher is going to bite at this. It's way too big. And you've removed all the uniqueness by saying, we have purposefully designed a world that is so large with procedural generation that either it will take hundreds of millions of dollars to handwrite all of this. And that's not including testing to make sure all these consequences can somehow matter when combined with each other. We have Spoon in our game in Colton Chronicles. We can't even keep track perfectly of all of Spoon's separate conditions. It took us 2 weeks to write Spoon's dialogue, and that's one NPC with probably, I don't even know how many words, but it's one NPC with only a few encounters that you can have with him. And that's already a lot of work to write, to balance, to make interesting, to properly bug fix. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time for one NPC, of which doesn't even have like any proper animations, or, you know, it's not even going into the art assets, art side of things, right? I don't see it. I don't see it. This game, I would even say, is impossible with the way they've designed it, because it would require so much money. I mean, you look at Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the greatest, most immersive games ever made. That's my not so hot take. This had a budget of 137 US dollars. And this is an incredible game. But it's still over $130 million with over 1,000 people that touched it at some point. Imagine how much money this game would take to make. And they want a prototype put onto Steam on early access for $710,000, and then go to a publisher and look for the rest. Bitch, you'd have to combine all the money from all the publishers in the world to make a game with this in mind. This is going to be, if this ever gets released, it will be the most disappointing, bland, stupidly large download size game that's ever been made. And I will be glad to say that I was there on day one saying that this was impossible. I hope they can make it. I just don't think it's going to happen. Because Starfield exists. Starfield at least had good faction quests. Starfield's faction quest lines were actually really enjoyable. I don't think the main story with the, whatever the fuck it's called, was really that cool. It had its interesting points, but it was nowhere near, the side faction content was actually quite interesting. That's what I'll say. Let's finish up with Tim Cain.
And a lot of money. So,
hold on.
What's to be doing? It's got to be good. And of course, like I've always said, that then translates to a big core game loop will translate into a big schedule, which will translate into a big team and a lot of money. So, it's in your best interest to try to get your core game loop as laser focused as possible.
Yep.
But understand that some games will have big core game loops. It's just always in your best interest. It's in your best interest. It's in your team's best interest for knowing what they should work on. And it's in the publisher's best interest for knowing what game they're buying and how you're going to respond to suggestions to change it. It's in everybody's best interest to get that core game loop defined as early and as specifically as you can. I hope this helps.
Another banger of a Tim Cain video. I highly recommend anybody interested in game design, or just game development in general. I know I talked over a lot of this, so if you want to watch it yourself without me talking shit over it, this was really good. This was a really great video from Tim Cain, as usual. And everything he said was 100% factually correct and good advice. Other than that, I'm going to get going. I'm so fucking exhausted. I'm going to go eat and relax. And then tomorrow, we will be on for the submarine development. I'm very scared. I don't know what to expect. So a lot of the game scope of the game changes. They find out this is going to take too long. Yeah, and that's why pre-production exists, right? You spend time making your prototype. You cut the shit that is not as fun, and you focus on the things that are fun and are good. And so that way, when you enter production, you know everything in our vertical slice is what we want to expand upon for the rest of the game. Anything that didn't make it into vertical slice is not going to be in the game. It's done. It's done. It's off. We save it for the sequel. SIFTs. SIFTS. Save it for the sequel. Or DLC. Post-release. I mean, you know, it's the same concept of save it until after the game is done. Then we look into it, right? If you have this great new idea, oh, the game would be amazing with this. Yeah, but we're already in fucking alpha. And you want me to prototype a new system and implement it when we have a deadline here? No way. Not gonna happen. Unfortunately, I've been part of a production that did have shit like that going on. Never again. Never again. All right, guys, I'm going to see you tomorrow for the submarine game prototype, or I guess even before that, we need to define what we want to do with that game. So, yeah, we'll figure it out. I guess we'll just take it by ear and make some mistakes, see what we can and can't do with the engine, and go crazy with it, right? All right, see you guys tomorrow. We might even make a gameplay loop tomorrow. I don't know. Gameplay loop and pillars. We'll see. See you guys tomorrow. Have a nice one. Stay cool, I guess, because it's pretty hot out today. And cheers. Have a nice Thursday.